When you look at the Brexit concern, every week we say, look, Theresa May's under pressure, is there a leadership challenge? But actually, it seems almost impossible for the Conservatives to want to oust her because, A, who would want the job? Two, it's unclear whether they win. And so, you know, what does that mean for euro-dollar?
So, you're right. I think it's much ado about nothing. When you look at the history of British politics, I'm reminded of the major government in the 1990s. And the reality then was a government with a tiny majority and then no majority can survive. It's likely that Theresa May follows that roadmap. So then when you think of it in terms of currencies, actually sterling's doing OK relative to the euro. Relative to the euro, sterling's a little stronger year to date. Euro-dollar's a bit different, but clearly the dominant force there is the euro move as opposed to the sterling move.
Jeremy?
I think it's interesting that obviously Theresa May is under intense political pressure and has been ever since she called and failed to win the majority in the election last year in particular. She's doing a very difficult task and really she's trying to placate two warring sides of her own party. Whether she can actually hold that together through the vote lobby this week is debatable, I think. But having said that, is that going to precipitate the end of the government? I don't think it necessarily does, for the exact same reason that who would necessarily want to trigger a leadership election at this particular point. So one suspects that the government will continue to limp on, her political authority continues to drain away, and I think that, for me, does cause some consternation about the valuation of sterling, because if you add that political uncertainty to the risks of the Bank of England being forced to hold rates at current levels through until at least the end of the year, that suggests to me that sterling should be a little bit cheaper.
But do you look at cable or do you look at euro-pound?
Well, I think in the context of cable, you need to think about the rate differentials, which I think are going to be moving further in favour of the US over the UK. So I think that does see cable going back towards the 131 area potentially. And in terms of euro sterling, I think that does trade higher, and I would be much happier if we were trading on an 89 handle rather than an 87.
Nick Gartside, I loved your comments there on John Major in a different time, in a different place. If that's your study of history, how does Prime Minister May extricate herself from the warfare of the Conservative Party?
So it's ultimately about just kicking that can down the road. And I've lost track of the number of weeks we've had where it's a crunch vote, where it's the final negotiation. The reality is it isn't any of that. So that can's likely to be kicked further down that road, and these negotiations aren't over till they're over. So you're into 2019 for that, and then probably a whole transition arrangement. And at the moment, it's being pushed very much towards a softer Brexit. You could argue that's sterling positive, not negative.
I mean, within this, again, is the calendar you put up. Who says 2019 is rigid? I mean, Britain can't decide what to do with this, that, and the other thing. Why are they going to decide in 6 months, 8 months, 12 months?
I think that's exactly right. And again, if you think of a transition period of a minimum of a couple of years, you can extend that to 2021, if not longer.
I mean, Jeremy Stretch, give us a sterling call here. Nick's telling us we're going to go this up, down, depending on the politics. What is the sterling call at CIBC?
Well, I think that's true. I think we are going to oscillate with the politics, but I think also that underlines the influence that those political risks have on the Bank of England. So I think the market, which is currently priced almost on a 50-50 basis in terms of an August rate hike from the Bank of England, I think that probability is far too high. And if you look at the underlying dynamics, whilst you can argue that if there is a soft Brexit, that might be sterling positive, there is this debate about the postponement of business investment in the current environment, concerns about consumer spending, the weakness in the London housing market. So I think the market is overplaying the probability of a rate hike from the Bank of England. I think that needs to be taken lower, and I think accordingly that will see sterling trading a little cheaper. And I think in the terms of the positioning also, I think the market is probably a little bit too long sterling in current valuations.
OK, so what would move, right, if it's on current valuations not where it should be?
Well, I mean, I think in the context, as I say, of if valuations or looking at the dynamics, then I think euro sterling should be, as I say, at least a couple of big figures higher. And sterling really does look, a little bit overvalued on the basis of the fundamentals as well as the political risks.